Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 579. Screening in select cinemas across Australia is Here Be Dragons, an Australian-made neo-noir set in Belgrade, Serbia, that stars Nathan Clark Sapsford as a war crimes investigator on the hunt for a war criminal many thought was dead. An engrossing mystery thriller that delves into a complex moral minefield in the aftermath of a brutal war. Here Be Dragons also marks the feature film debut of director and writer Alastair Newton Brown, who I'm glad to say joins me now on the podcast. Alastair, how are you?
Good, thank you, Matthew. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. When I first caught wind of Here Be Dragons, my radar went up straight away because I don't know if you know from my surname Perkovic, my background is Croatian, so
Yes,
anything Balkan War associated is just something that's kind of like I take an interest in, and I remember
yes,
very well back in the 90s, especially when the war was in Croatian territory. And many nights of my parents with phone calls with people overseas and news from over there, and
yeah, of
recording the news
course.
on Australian television. But what about on your analysis? What is about the Balkans War that kind of spoke to you as not only like a just not only as a human being but a filmmaker and a storyteller that led to this backdrop for this neo noir that many people are seeing around the country right now.
Well, I used to be a history teacher, and I taught modern history to high school students for around 11 years. And the Balkans, in general, I guess from about but before the First World War until the 90s,
Mm.
was a topic that came up every year that I taught every year to year 8, 9, 10. Because obviously it's a hotbed of 20th century history, or it's certainly a hot spot. And I became very interested in the region just traveling there while I was teaching. And I'm also a Hungarian citizen. My
Mhm.
mother's family are from Hungary, which is on the border of Serbia and quite close to the other Balkan countries. So I guess there was that influence. And I was drawn to it as a filmmaking location, actually because of my cinematographer who ended up living there, also a Hungarian citizen, funnily enough, and Australian. And he ended up living in Serbia to be able to shoot films in Eastern Europe and the Balkans, which has become a bit of a scene for filmmaking in the last sort of 10 years. And he said to me, "You've got to come and see this place. It's really incredible. Come and look at the Balkans." He was living in Belgrade, so that's where I started when I went for a trip, and I was looking for something to make. And I'd always been interested in Balkan history and Balkan people, and sort of it all clicked into place for me when I went and saw it. And I thought I could really make a film here and say something quite interesting and maybe unusual for an Australian person to do. And it kind of, yeah, lent it. I didn't want to make a film or do a story that just used that location or that region or those people as a kind of, a lot of films are made there to look like London or to look like Berlin or like a cheap version of some other European country or some
Mm.
sort of androgynous action film. And I didn't want to do that. I really wanted to find a story that interested my history, my interest in history, and kind of could marry it into a genre, as you say, neo-noir genre that sort of ticked all the boxes and worked with the people that were there too.
I've spoken to a lot of filmmakers over the years about filming in the Balkans or near there, filming in Croatia or other places, Hungary or Romania and other places around there as well. What's the
Mhm.
experience like working in Serbia? What's the film industry like over there now? Is it something that's become really burgeoning in regards to cast and crew? Do you need to do you do like do you source a lot of kind of like the local talent there to kind of work with your crew that you brought over from Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say about, well, obviously the cast is probably around almost 90% locals from Serbia. And the crew, I'd say about 75% of the crew were Serbians. We had some Croatians actually as well, and Bosnian people. And it was It was fairly straightforward. I got in touch with a casting director fairly early on in the process, and she was instrumental in helping me set up meetings with a wide range of actors and actresses over there. It's interesting because there's a huge theatre scene in Belgrade. I don't know about
Mhm.
Croatia, but in Belgrade definitely. And afterwards, it's sort of $5, $10 to go and watch a play, and the theatres are packed every night, and people go into the bars afterwards and talk to the actors. And there's a real kind of scene. It's a small little city, and there's like three bars where all the actors go, and so you can kind of go and hang out with them. And then once you know half a dozen actors and actresses, then you start to meet crew, and there's not that many crew there either, and five or six, gaffers, for example. And if you can't get one, they sort of recommend somebody else, and everybody knows everyone. So it feels like a really thriving scene, and people were very, very interested and enthusiastic to work with me. Some weren't so enthusiastic about the subject matter, but that kind of sorted itself out as we got into the process.
Yeah, I was curious about that because the times that I've been over in Croatia and in other places where I visit family, whether it be, with other Croatian communities and such, it seems to me that on one end, the younger generation that I talk to over there are kind of like that are more removed from the war. They get along more with kind of like their Serbian neighbors and such, but the people who live through it are still like harboring lots of traumas and such. So when
Mm.
you're coming in there as an Australian, with a story regarding, not so much, regarding the war. This isn't like a documentary or anything, but using the war as a context of a background for this story. I'd imagine that some people would feel some sort of a way in regards to that.
Absolutely. Quite a few people needed convincing that this wasn't an anti-Serbian film.
Mm,
And look, as you know, it's one of those issues, and there are many. There's some going on today where it doesn't matter what you say, you will encounter criticism or strong feelings or emotions from people. So I was very conscious about not being this sort of foreign dude going in there and trying to tell everyone how it's going to be on their own history, and a very, very sensitive history. I don't think Australians realise how sensitive it is in
mm,
Serbia and the Balkans. And I was very, very conscious of that. And I think the script is very conscious of that. The film is very conscious of that, trying to explore different points of view, trying to present different angles, and trying to sort of explain this idea that there's no winners. There's no correct side. It's everyone's sort of a loser in conflict. And yeah, some people were ambivalent. But as you mentioned, young people, and yeah, I found younger people actually didn't really care. They're like, why would you bother doing this? Sort of like,
mm,
who cares? But people, I guess, over the age of about 40,
yeah,
either were extremely emotional about it and wanted to have big conversations to make sure I was on the right side of history, if that makes sense. And
yeah.
others were like, no, this is important exploration, and you've got as much right as anybody, and nobody here will do it anyway, so you may as well go for it.
I wanted to talk about Slobodan Bestic, who
Mm,
plays Jovan Petrovic in the movie. It's a fantastic performance because it's a very much a easy, isn't he, kind of thing in regards to the antagonist. There's a mystery there, but there's also this really great underlying darkness in the movie. I think one of the best scenes in the film is a one-on-one conversation between Nathan Sapsford, investigator, and Slobodan's character in an office, and
yeah.
there's you don't want to give away too much, but there's a bit of a connection there, really intense connection between the two, and just the
Mm.
way in which Slobodan is able to evoke a certain darkness within himself without being too overly villainy. I found him incredibly impressive. What was it like working with him in the movie?
It was amazing. He's a true thespian, Slobber, and took that part in particular was a very difficult part for a Serbian person to wrap their head. I think. Well, let me rephrase. is a very controversial part for a Serbian to play, even though it doesn't seem that way to Aussies or anyone else, I guess, outside the Balkans.
Mm.
I think he played that part. He took on that part. It took a lot of courage to sort of do it, and he was constantly checking with me his where he's at on the scale of between dark and light, and the old character that he plays in the he's a double-headed beast, isn't it? His character. So he was constantly trying to check where he was on that scale, whether he's the allowing the darkness to consume him, or he's like the pathway, the lighter side of his character to consume him. And he was actually, you mentioned that scene. Once that scene was shot, he was very, very that was a very, very difficult scene to get right, and he he built his way through that character in that scene. Particularly, he shot it quite early on. Once we'd shot
Mm.
that scene, he was like, "I know exactly who this guy is. I'm fine to do everything else." It's quite interesting, but brilliant actor, and really brought a lot to the unbelievably expressive face. I mean, it's an amazing stuff. I really found it very interesting working with him.
The title of the film is really curious to me, Here Be Dragons, and I was kind of like thinking about, well, I wonder which way Alastair's going with this. And then when I watched the movie, and in that scene in particular, Slobodan's character talks about how repressed, holding back repressed darkness or traumas within yourself can become like an angry dragon. You can either control it through communication, or you can kind of keep it, chained and unfed, and then it comes out on its own and just destroys everything around it. I thought it was just a really interesting kind of metaphor. Where did you find, what was the source for that kind of metaphor, that kind of symbology in regards to the dragon, and kind of like this kind of like a beast within all of us, especially a character as nefarious as someone like the antagonist in your movie?
Well, apart from the fact that dragons sort of come from that, I mean, the mythology of dragons is very strong in that region. And I couldn't tell, Carpathian mountains, like it's Romania, Hungary, Serbia, Balkan. That's a very big thing in that region. I actually took the title from medieval maps, where they used to put regions that hadn't been explored properly. They would sometimes draw a sea monster and actually write "Here be dragons" onto the map, meaning proceed with caution.
Right.
And I think that's where I took the title from, because a lot of what Slobber talks about in that scene is about the inner demons we all have, and your ability, and a lot of it comes from Jungian psychology as well, where he talks about the darkness inside of us all, and the only way that we can sort of get to be a truly good person, or a good functioning human being, is to understand that we have those dragons. We have dragons deep down there, or darkness, or whatever you want to call it. And we must fully recognize it, and control it. And a person who can control those urges and those things, and fully incorporate them into their psyche, is a person who can then go and do good and be peaceful in the world. If you don't acknowledge that, if you don't, so goes the theory. If you don't acknowledge that and don't go through the motions of fully investigating that, then you actually can end up being a heinous criminal, doing evil in the world. So, which is what that character has done. It's just that in this film, that character has done it to the very extreme, and through that experience has learnt that actually he can use that terrible experience to maybe do some good. Now, whether or not, therefore, we can forgive him is a different story, and I guess that's what the film is all about. I also sort of very much thought of David Locke, the main character, played by Nathan, as a kind of dragon, in coming out of his shell, and sort of the constant smoking. I know you probably picked up on. It's kind of it's a bit of like a dragon blowing smoke constantly, and just coming out of the cave and starting to understand and come to terms with his own darkness. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to play with.
Well, the smoking, the other thing I noticed about that, well, or two things actually, is that when it comes to the whole kind of neo-noir, kind of noirish kind of thing, the main protagonist, the gumshoe, trench coat gumshoe, which I think Nathan plays
Yeah,
very well as well. Usually are very much heavy smokers is like part of it, but also it's such to me, such a Balkan experience, the smoking. I remember when I was not when I was last there, but when I was there back when I back in my mid 20s, early 20s smoking days. I don't think I've ever smoked as much cigarettes in my life until I
yeah, yeah.
in Croatia and then other places as well. It's just so much a part of the culture. Is
Oh,
that
they
still
love it.
the case? It's kept the case now as well. Are they still kind of knocking back those cigarettes? There's no vaping over there. It's
Absolutely.
still old school cigarettes.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's old. Well, the smokes that he was smoking in the film were specially made ones because I think he would have, you know, keeled over on set if
Oh
we
yeah.
gave him proper cigarettes. But
Yeah.
but yes, everybody was smoking constantly, and you can smoke indoors, and it's very cheap, and it's not conducive of a healthy lung making a film over in Balkans, but it's interesting. It certainly adds contrast. I mean, there's just so much contrast, and I think
Mm.
smoke in general when you're hanging out there and you're sitting in these bars, the light is different to Australia. The bars are differently lit and there's smoke everywhere. It's so
Yeah.
atmospheric. It's so interesting, and you can feel it just heightens everything, unhealthy as it is. Yeah, it really does add something. It really does.
I think I don't know if people will want to admit it or not, but smoke, especially in the context of cigar or cigarette smoke, in a lot of ways, is part of the fabric of cinema imagery, especially when it
Mm,
comes to
mm.
the golden age of cinema and those kind of scenes in those movies. It's something that's really kind of goes part and parcel with a lot of that stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, noir films, I think, definitely. I mean, 100%. There's this every noir film is full of smoke, isn't it? And
Mm.
but yeah, it is iconic, and it's going away, and it probably. I don't. I mean, smoking in this country, in Australia, is pretty much non-existent anymore. And people still smoke, but it's very expensive, and
Mm.
you can't smoke indoors and so on. And I think there's probably a cohort of people that are trying to eliminate smoking on the screen. But I don't think I think you're right. I think it's iconic. You can't just eliminate those things. But it serves a function in this film. If you notice, there's a he actually doesn't smoke from around about the scene you described, where Novak and where Slobber and Nathan have a chat in the office. After that scene, he doesn't actually smoke till the end of the movie,
Mm.
which is kind of like, I guess, a little take on the emergence of the idea in Nathan in Nathan's character, that he sort of should start to work on himself and fix himself up rather than try and sort of save the world from everything. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
It does. It totally
Yeah.
does, and there's a little gesture that he makes at the end of the film. Like I said, I don't want to give away that kind of brings a certain amount
Yes.
of closure to
Sure.
that as well. I think as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
there's a line in the movie that stuck with me when Nathan is over there. He's talking to some of his old cohorts, trying to get some resources together.
Mm,
And when he's questioned about his investigation, one of his old mates says, if you want to choose monsters, the world has no shortage. And I think it's
mm,
something that is even like today's context of the things that are going on now.
mm,
It's definitely true. I mean, it's been something like 20 some odd years, maybe more, since the end of the Balkan Wars, and the atrocities done in that war, even though incredibly horrific, it just seems to be magnified more in different areas of the world. And it just seems to me that I don't know about yourself, Alastair, but that character of David Locke, you could put him in different periods of time, and he could have been
mm,
thrust into finding different monsters at any given moment during human history. And I think fully on
mm.
us for that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you say, because I'd like to think that he could definitely be anywhere in the world right now and doing the same thing. it's unfortunately a never-ending story, isn't it? A
Mm.
conflict between two countries or humans, or even your next door neighbor. And I sort of and he's one of these people that based on real people, by the way. A lot of the real David Locks are actually Australians, for reasons which we probably don't have enough time to go into. But the Australian police were very much involved in UN investigative work in the Balkan conflict and other conflicts around the world. And yeah, unfortunately, it's a never-ending thing, never-ending cycle of madness. And I think the film maybe puts forward the point of, where does it end? I think Nathan's character in the end is kind of like overwhelmed by the idea that this will just never end. Actually, I'm sort of part of the problem, maybe. And I need to go away and reassess my values and what it is that we're doing here, and how on earth we come out of it. Because yeah, I tend to wonder. I mean, if the film very much came from a place of that, like we're looking at conflicts and just going, where is this going to end? The truth is, the first casualty of war is the truth, as we
Yeah.
see today, every day, especially with social media. So much stuff out there, and you have no idea what to believe. And how do we come to terms with it, and how do we try to stop the cycle of hatred being passed on to the next person and the next person? And where does that stop? These are all the things that are floating around in my head while I was writing it.
When you screen the film here in Australia, you've done screenings in Geelong. I know you were in Dendy, Newtown last week. Tonight you're in Hawthorn,
Yep,
in Victoria. I know
yep.
Victoria especially has a very prominent Serbian community there, as does New South Wales. Do you get any feedback in regards to local audiences in regards to the film and its themes?
I haven't been approached by anybody who said they've had Serbian heritage. I've met quite a few Croatian people though, which is
Mm.
interesting. And they some are kind of shocked that an Australian has gone over there and made this film.
Mm.
Um, I haven't had anybody come to me in anger, or
Mm.
sort of say that you've got no idea what you're talking about. Although I'm sort of expecting it, because it comes with the territory.
Right.
But I've had honestly quite positive feedback from everybody, and thanks actually. Some Croatian people have said thank you for shining a light on these things, and taking the time and effort to discuss it in a more nuanced way, because the nuance gets lost in history, doesn't it? And and
It
and
does.
through social media and so on. And I never wanted to take sides in that conflict, and certainly not on a country level. Sure,
Mm.
in characters in the film, I mean, you're trying to tell a story, so there's going to be antagonists and so on. But even then, I've tried to be as nuanced and shades of grey as possible. So I hope that people with Balkan heritage see it as a genuine and a sort of positive and hopefully objective attempt to bring light to the conflict and the history, and try to derive interesting conversation out of it, from which we can move forward and be peaceful and learn things.
Yeah, and I got to add to that, as someone, as I said at the start of our discussion, who very much remembers that time, especially in the 90s, when the more recent kind of fracases between the two countries were really in full throttle.
Mm,
It's I think Here Be Dragons is a very nuanced and mature approach to it as well. Not any way exploitative, and not any way, as you said before. I get invited to a lot of kind of films from
mhm.
like Croatian filmmakers and such, and sometimes what I watch is kind of like really kind of propagandized kind of stuff, which is incredibly frustrating to watch. And so to watch your film, to watch Here Be Dragons and see the movie, and just to reiterate, this isn't a documentary, this isn't like a political film, this is very much a neo-noir, just with the setting of the Balkan War in the background. But still in that context, I think it's incredibly nuanced and mature on your behalf. And I just want to say thank you for that, because I think you did a really great job in finding that balance between telling the story, but also being respectful to the world that you're based in as well.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm really glad to hear it.
So for everyone out there listening, Here Be Dragons, you can go to screeninc.com. That is screeninc.com.au. And you can actually find their different screening times, and the Screen Inc. Also on Facebook, and they got different screening times as such. I imagine, Alastair, above as well as the current screenings that you had around the country, there's going to be more in the future, hopefully, as well, for people to watch the film in cinemas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're getting new screenings coming up, well, every week it seems, but certainly earlier in the new year before the digital release in Australia and New Zealand, and we're also releasing in America and Canada in probably about April next year.
Excellent. For everyone out there, if you do get a chance to watch it in the cinemas, watch it in the cinemas. We need to support Australian independent filmmakers, filmmakers like Alastair, who tell really great, nuanced, mature kind of genre storytelling like we see in Here Be Dragons. It's very pivotal that we get more stories like this on our screens made by our filmmakers. And Alastair, I thank you so very much for your time today. Best of luck with tonight's screening. I know, I'm pretty sure it's a Q&A as well tonight you're doing?
Yeah, Q&A with me and Nathan. So nice. Should be great.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, and congrats on the film.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Matt.
Alastair, mate, I thank you so very much for that. And I thank you so very much again for rescheduling. And I'm going to have this podcast up today. I've got a premiere I got to go tonight, hopefully before I go to the premiere. And then, as soon as I do, and as soon as I get the review up as well, I'll be sure to send you links so you can have a listen and a read and all that.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Matt. I'm glad. It was a really great chat, and I'm glad you enjoyed it, or you found it thought-provoking. Really happy.
I did, very much so. And thank you so very much for your time and for the film as well.
No worries. Thanks, mate. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.